Lucie Blackman, during her time as a British Airways flight attendant, always lit up the cabin with her radiant smile. The kind of smile that shone brighter than the overhead lights. The kind passengers remembered long after even the most exhausting flights. But that evening, in her small apartment in Roppongi, where neon signs outside flickered like cold, unblinking eyes watching every movement, Lucie sat before her vanity, gently smoothing her slightly tangled blonde hair after the nearly 13-hour journey. And in that moment, something in the air felt subtly wrong. The open suitcases scattered across the floor looked as if she had either rushed back or was absent-mindedly preparing for a trip she herself didn't yet know she was going to take. Her shoulders drooped with fatigue, yet her eyes remained bright and clear, glowing like a candle that had never been snuffed out. Music from the Casablanca bar below drifted in through the window, blending with the hum of traffic and distant footsteps, the usual nighttime soundtrack of Tokyo. But that night, the sound seemed stretched, distorted. The overhead light flickered once, then steadied. The apartment door stayed closed. Her phone lay motionless on the table. In a city as crowded as Tokyo, such silence could be far more unsettling than noise. The clock ticked in sharp, steady beats, like a countdown Lucie didn't know was aimed directly at her. A cold draft seeped through the doorframe, brushing against a small note she had left on the table, making it tremble, a movement so subtle no one would have noticed. Yet, in the context of what was about to unfold, it felt like a quiet warning from fate. The paper quivered, as if touched by an invisible hand Lucie couldn't see. And in that instant, the room seemed to deepen into something cavernous, as though someone, or something, was standing just beyond the edge of the light, watching patiently. No one in the buzzing streets of Roppongi that night knew that Lucie Blackman was stepping into the final moments in which the world would ever see her whole. A night that seemed perfectly ordinary was, in truth, the beginning of a horrifying case that would send chills down the spines of people across both the UK and Japan. While you're listening right now, pause for just 1 second. Are you truly safe where you are? Has a harmless invitation ever turned into something that shattered an entire life? Imagine this. A quiet evening, your phone rings, a casual invitation. A sudden plan. How would you respond? When you're sitting in your living room, folding a towel, or reaching into your closet, would you know what the person about to knock on your door is carrying with them? Stories like Lucie Blackman's aren't distant exceptions. They are subtle warnings that darkness sometimes takes on a familiar shape. Share your thoughts in the comments below, because sometimes a single cautious thought can save someone else. And if you believe stories like this matter, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because the knowledge you gain today might be what keeps you safe tomorrow. Now, let's step into the story of Lucie Blackman, into a seemingly harmless evening that opened a door from which there was no return. Lucie Jane Blackman was born on September 1, 1978, in the town of Sevenoaks, Kent, England, into a warm, middle-class family where every dinner was filled with children's laughter and small stories about school and friends. She was the eldest of 3 siblings, long accustomed to looking after the younger ones and helping her parents with little chores around the house. Neighbors remembered Lucie as the girl who was always ready to hold someone's baby when the parents were busy, a young woman who would bend down to pick up a dropped bag for an elderly passerby, all with that bright, effortless smile. On her beautiful face, framed by long blonde hair and a tall, graceful figure, her eyes always shimmered with curiosity. Curiosity for new places, new journeys, new stories she had not yet heard. Her friends said Lucie wasn't the loud party type. She preferred late-night conversations, the kind where people talked about dreams, failures, and plans for the future. She was always the first to listen and the last to encourage, exactly the kind of person others instinctively trusted. When she became a flight attendant for British Airways, Lucie saw it as a source of pride not only for herself, but for her entire family. Each time she came home, she brought small gifts from the places she had traveled, slipping a Swiss chocolate bar into her mother's hand, giving her younger brother a postcard with the New York skyline, telling her father stories about the quirky passengers she met on long-haul flights. The work was exhausting, the time zones unforgiving. Yet Lucie always tried to keep that radiant smile when she wheeled her suitcase down the airport corridors. She believed she was doing exactly what she loved, flying, exploring, seeing a world far bigger than the small streets of Sevenoaks. But behind the pressed uniform and the professional exterior, Lucie faced ordinary worries, debts that needed to be paid, financial pressure, and the gnawing feeling that she wanted to do something bigger with her youth. At 21, she stood at a crossroads. Continue the steady life of flying back and forth, or take a bold step towards something new. That was when Tokyo appeared in her life, like a dream both reckless and dazzling. Together with her close friend, Louise Phillips, Lucie made the decision to leave her flight attendant job and travel to Japan under a 90-day tourist visa. On the surface, it was only 3 short months. But to Lucie, it felt like a chance to reset, to earn more money to pay off her debts, to immerse herself in a completely different culture, and to test whether she could stand on her own in a foreign land. She wasn't wealthy and had no financial safety net waiting for her back home, but she had something else, the belief that if she was polite, hardworking, and determined, she could adapt anywhere. Before leaving, Lucie hugged each family member tightly, telling her mother, "I'll be fine. I'm grown now," promising her sibling she would send photos every week, reassuring her father that this was just a youthful adventure, not a permanent goodbye. When she arrived in Tokyo, Lucie was overwhelmed by the neon lights and the fast yet orderly rhythm of the city. She soon found work at Casablanca, an upscale club in Roppongi, where hostesses chatted with guests, poured drinks, and made them feel at ease. With her striking height and eye-catching blonde hair, Lucie was quickly noticed. But what people remembered about her was not the looks. It was her politeness. She bowed to the security guards, checked on older coworkers, and even after long shifts, she made time to call home to tell her family about her day. Yet the hostess profession in Tokyo was far more complicated than its glamorous surface suggested. Casablanca existed on a fragile boundary between entertainment and an unpredictable underworld. Hostesses were not sex workers, but that line could easily be bent, warped by money and the power of men who believed everything had a price. In this environment, dohan, private outings for dinner or drinks, became an essential part of the job. For foreign hostesses like Lucie, every time they agreed to one, it was a gamble. The chance to earn extra income came with the risk of placing themselves in the hands of a complete stranger. Many worked on short-term visas with no formal contracts, and when trouble came, there was almost no system in place to protect them. On the outside, Tokyo was known as a safe city. Beneath that surface, Roppongi was another world entirely, a place where wealthy men came to shed their daytime personas, and young women scraped together every yen they could to survive. This imbalance led many, even the police, to look at Lucie with a hint of prejudice, to see her as someone who had accepted the risks, rather than a young woman working legally within the limited options her youth and circumstances allowed. Still, her new life offered Lucie small pockets of happiness. She slept through the mornings after her late shifts, walked to the corner supermarket in the afternoons, and on rare weekends drove out to the beach with friends. She loved standing in front of the waves, the wind whipping her hair, imagining the future, paying off her debts, going back to school, perhaps opening a little shop of her own. Her friends said she rarely complained, always turning exhaustion into a funny story. Everything seemed to be slowly shifting for the better. Her income was improving, regular customers were returning, and she was surrounded by warm, supportive friends. Lucie felt as though she was finally beginning to belong to the city instead of simply drifting through it as a lost tourist. Until the afternoon of July 1st, 2000. At Casablanca, Lucie excitedly called her friend Louise, not once, but several times, telling her about the good meal and the cool breeze as a customer had taken her to a seaside restaurant. Over the phone, Lucie's voice was bubbly, full of energy. She said the coastal road was beautiful, the air refreshing, and that she felt more like she was on a holiday than at work. She reassured Louise that everything was fine, that the man was polite, appeared wealthy, and seemed like the kind of customer other hostesses had met before. Around 7 p.m., just before stepping out of her small Roppongi apartment, Lucie stood in front of the mirror adjusting her elegant black dress, smoothing the fabric, checking the little heart-shaped necklace around her neck. Her high heels were neatly placed by the door. She turned to Louise, flashed a bright smile, and said, "I'm going to meet the customer. I shouldn't be late. Don't wait up too long for me." It was such an ordinary moment that no one thought it was something worth remembering. No one knew it would be the last time Lucie was ever seen alive and well. After that, her tiny apartment felt as if time had abandoned it. Her phone stayed silent, not a single call or message coming in. The things Lucie had left unfinished remained untouched. The half-packed suitcase, the cup on the sink still marked with droplets of water. Night breeze drifted in through the window frame, stirring the thin curtain and casting faint shadows on the empty wall. At first, Louise assumed her friend was simply running late, maybe taken somewhere farther than expected. But as the clock hands crept forward, as the sun rose again without Lucie returning, the vague unease inside Louise slowly hardened into real fear. News of Lucie Blackman's disappearance spread across the United Kingdom like a cold wind slicing through every household with a young daughter. Morning newspapers printed her photo alongside the headline, "Missing in Tokyo." Lucie's parents, Dr. Tim Blackman and Sue, couldn't wait even another hour. They rushed onto a flight to Tokyo, carrying with them the fragile hope that Lucie was merely lost or caught in some temporary mishap. At the first press conference, Tim clutched a photo of Lucie as dozens of cameras aimed at him, his voice breaking as he pleaded, "Please help us find our daughter." The case quickly escalated into a diplomatic issue. British Foreign Secretary Robin Cook, during his visit to Japan, requested maximum support from the Japanese government. And when Prime Minister Tony Blair was asked about the missing British girl in Japan, he responded bluntly, "We will do everything we can to bring Lucie home." Such a strong declaration was rare for an individual missing person case, revealing just how enormous the public pressure in the UK had become. Tens of thousands of flyers with Lucie's face were printed and distributed everywhere. Train stations, bus stops, convenience stores, nightclubs, neon-lit streets. Anyone who had set foot in Roppongi that July remembered the image of a grieving father standing in the crowd, handing out flyers with trembling hands but unwavering determination in his eyes. Roppongi, usually loud and overflowing with nightlife, seemed darkened from the day Lucie vanished. Japanese newspapers ran constant updates, a rare occurrence in a country where crimes involving foreign victims were almost unheard of. In early August 2000, police received an envelope mailed from Chiba Prefecture, about an hour's drive from Tokyo. The signature at the bottom was none other than Lucie Blackman. In the letter, the writer claimed that Lucie was fine, that she was resting, and asked her family to please don't worry about me. The short, emotionless sentences sounded nothing like Lucie's gentle, thoughtful way of writing. The postmark, however, was in the exact direction investigators believed she had traveled on her final afternoon. The letter was immediately suspected to be a clumsy attempt at misdirection, possibly written by the abductor himself. A few days later, Louise Phillips, the friend who had traveled to Japan with Lucie, received a strange phone call from a man calling himself Akira Takagi. His voice was low, clipped, and unsettling. He claimed that Lucie had joined a cult in Chiba and no longer wished to contact her family. Louise felt her blood run cold. She knew Lucie, absolutely knew that she was not the type of person to join a cult, nor would she ever abandon her family. Her breath tightened as she gripped the phone and said, "You're lying. Where is Lucie?" The caller hung up immediately. Japanese police quickly confirmed the call was fake, another sign that someone was trying to steer the investigation into dark, dead-end alleys. But what infuriated the Blackman family, more than anything, came from the authorities themselves. At first, Japanese police appeared almost indifferent to Lucie's case. They cited a shockingly dismissive reason: that hostesses like Lucie sometimes choose to take a break and disappear with foreign boyfriends, so they needed to wait and observe before investigating. The attitude hit the Blackmans like a slap of ice-cold water. Facing mounting criticism from the foreign press, pressure from the British embassy, and the need to protect Japan's national image, the police finally moved. Over 100 officers were dispatched to Roppongi, combing through regular customer lists, reviewing surveillance footage, tracing every lead. Coastal areas, hotels, and short-term rental apartments were searched meticulously. The tension swallowing Tokyo grew suffocating. Just when everything seemed stuck in hopeless stagnation, a series of unexpected testimonies emerged, opening the first window into the shadowy silhouette of a predator. Several foreign women who had once worked at Casablanca, upon seeing Lucie's photo in the news, suddenly remembered fragmented experiences they had buried out of shame or fear. They recounted being invited by a foreign-looking man to a seafood restaurant by the coast, and waking up the next morning in a strange apartment, only a hollow, indescribable emptiness. One remembered he called himself Kazu. Another insisted on the name Yuji. Someone else swore he introduced himself as Koji. Different names, yet the same general description: tall, somewhat foreign-looking, fluent in Japanese, but not naturally so, polite to the point of being unsettling. Those vague fragments, when pieced together, formed a chilling picture. A man who knew exactly how vulnerable hostesses were, who knew how to lead them into an evening that seemed harmless, only for them to wake up in confusion. A man who used multiple aliases, multiple social masks, drifting between Tokyo and the coastal regions as if they were his personal hunting grounds. A shadow was emerging from these stories, a shadow everyone hoped had nothing to do with Lucie Blackman. Yet deep down, everyone knew coincidences never stacked up like that, unless guided by the hand of a true predator. Joji Obara is a name that sends shivers down the spine of anyone familiar with the Lucie Blackman case. Born in 1952 to a wealthy Korean family in Osaka, Obara grew up surrounded by money, privilege, and an elite education. He lacked for nothing, yet it was this very excess that seemed to carve a warped emptiness inside him. As an adult, Obara moved to Tokyo, living under numerous false identities, sometimes posing as a businessman, other times as an international investor. In the Roppongi underground scene of the 1990s, he was known as the generous, polite, wealthy man who frequented all-night parties with students and socialites. He was regarded as a charming, successful drifter, but it was all a facade concealing a grotesque inner life. Obara harbored a dark obsession with blonde, white women, a twisted desire that combined possession with contempt. His apartment, when it was finally searched, froze the investigators in place the moment they stepped in. In his closets, under the floorboards, behind curtains, inside drawers, everywhere were videotapes documenting rape. He wore a Zorro mask. He chained victims' limbs. He filmed every moment of their unconscious bodies. Some tapes lasted hours, showing Obara calmly playing with the women's bodies as though they were lifeless mannequins. Digging deeper, police discovered overwhelming evidence that he had been using strong sedatives and chloroform to incapacitate women before abducting and assaulting them. Every page of his personal notebooks revealed a depravity almost impossible to fathom. Obara referred to his assaults as conquest games, writing that women were simply tools for release. If Lucie's story was the first time the world heard the name Joji Obara, then for several other families, that name had haunted them long before. In 1992, nearly a decade before Lucie set foot in Tokyo, another young woman had left her homeland with a dream strikingly similar to hers. Carita Simone Ridgway, 21, a model from Perth, Australia, had come to Japan to work as a hostess so she could save money for film school. She stood behind the bar, poured drinks, smiled at wealthy customers, believing she was simply taking a shortcut toward her ambitions. One night, Carita agreed to have dinner with a man who introduced himself as a successful businessman, the same kind of facade the world would later recognize as Obara's signature disguise. Not long after, Carita was rushed to the hospital in a coma. The man who brought her in told doctors she had suffered shellfish poisoning. The medical team fought to save her, but Carita never woke up. She died from liver failure and severe brain damage, quickly recorded as a medical condition in her file. No deeper investigation was made. Her family begged for answers. But at that time, both Japanese police and diplomatic officials treated the case as an unfortunate, unexplained medical tragedy involving a foreign girl working nightlife. It was only years later, when police searched Obara's apartment during the investigation into Lucie's disappearance, that they found the fragments that cast Carita's death in a horrifying new light. In one of Obara's notebooks, he had scribbled a chilling line, "Carita Ridgway, too much chloroform." On one of the videotapes, investigators saw her face, motionless, unconscious, in that same familiar room, with the masked man playing his conquest game, exactly as he had described in his journals. Suddenly, the shellfish poisoning story fell apart completely. Carita, like Lucie after her, had lain on that bed, under that camera, reduced to a trophy in the diary of a depraved predator. And Carita wasn't the only one. When the Obara case exploded, Japanese and international media revisited numerous accounts from women who had knocked on the doors of the Roppongi police station long before Lucie disappeared. Some had attempted to seek medical tests. Others were too ashamed and chose silence. Those who were brave enough to report often received cold, dismissive questions. Do you have evidence? How much do you remember? Their legal status? Many working on the wrong type of visa, became the perfect excuse to file their stories away and forget them. Looking back, those scattered testimonies, Carita's death, the videotapes, and the diary entry "too much chloroform" together formed a blazing red warning board that no one bothered to piece together until Lucie vanished. If police back then had taken every trembling voice in the interview room seriously, if the death of a young Australian hostess had been properly investigated, Obara might have been stopped before he ever laid a hand on Lucie. That "should have" is the phrase that haunts many families, many investigators, an unspoken indictment against an entire system that slept through warning signs far too obvious to ignore. During the search of his home and his rented apartment on the Mura Peninsula, police seized numerous items. Among them were hair samples and traces that matched Lucie. Each piece of evidence felt like a layer of gray dust settling on a truth everyone feared to name. In early February 2001, that brutal truth surfaced clearer than ever. While expanding their search along the Mura coastline, the excavation team discovered a strange concrete block. When they broke it open, what they found inside left the entire forensic unit frozen. Lucie's head had been sealed into the solid slab of cement. Not far from it were several other body parts, torso, arms, all dismembered and carefully wrapped to slow decomposition and mask the smell. Police confirmed they belonged to her. Due to advanced decomposition, forensic teams could not determine the exact cause of death, but they found signs of strangulation. Her facial bones and soft tissues showed severe trauma, indicating that Lucie had been brutally beaten before she died. All suspicion now pointed directly, overwhelmingly, at Joji Obara. In mid-April 2001, Tokyo police formally arrested the 48-year-old Obara on charges of kidnapping, rape, murder, dismemberment, and disposal of Lucie's body. The news tore across Japan like a storm, ending every lingering doubt or speculative theory. But inside the interrogation room, Obara kept his face blank, his tone unnervingly calm, denying everything. He admitted to drinking with Lucie at Casablanca, but claimed she had left with another man whose name he did not know. To prosecutors, it was nothing more than a practiced performance from a pathological liar. To the public, outrage grew as his lawyers fanned chaos, blaming anything and everything, poking at loose ends in the files, even floating absurd theories designed solely to muddy the narrative. A horrifying secret gradually surfaced as the investigation expanded to the apartments Obara had once frequented. What police recovered sent a chill through the entire investigative team, like a cold wind cutting down their spines. In the small bathtub of his Tokyo apartment, they found tiny traces of blood, so faint they were visible only when the inspection light hit at an angle. On the living room floor, a few light-colored strands of hair lay mixed with dust, along with a thin silver bracelet, the exact model Lucie had worn on the night she disappeared. Even these few details were enough to stain the entire room with the sense that darkness had swept through it. The bedside cabinet held a pile of items that made investigators fall silent. Chains, metal restraints, objects whose very appearance suggested something deeply twisted. They understood that the warm, bright young woman who had once stood in front of her mirror in Roppongi had been here, inside a room carrying the cold air of a prison with no exit, and that knowledge only pushed them harder to uncover the truth at any cost. While reviewing documents and evidence, police also discovered an anonymous letter sent to them, its phrasing warped and disturbing. The writer did not reveal his identity, yet the tone carried the sickening confidence of someone who believed he held the power of life and death. He described Lucie with chilling detachment, treating her as an object he possessed. The lines showed no remorse, only provocation. The handwriting trembled slightly, but the emotional control was unnervingly calm, like a psychological fingerprint. Based on the full spread of evidence and testimonies, investigators began piecing everything together. Lucie had left Roppongi in the mindset of a regular work outing, accompanying a customer she believed to be polite. She stepped into a car that led her somewhere more remote, where the city lights disappeared behind her, and perhaps at that moment she realized she had walked straight into a trap. Every investigator who reconstructed Lucie's final journey felt their throat tighten, imagining the moment she begged in desperation, a cry swallowed by the night, heard by no one. From this point onward, the investigation was no longer about finding a missing woman, but about reclaiming justice for a girl dragged into a merciless darkness. The court later released a chilling psychological profile of Joji Obara. To him, destroying the bodies and spirits of his victims was a way to assert dominance. In his eyes, Lucie was not a person, merely prey unlucky enough to stumble into the territory of a soul already rotted from within. There was no sophisticated motive, only a monstrous deviation driven by a warped hunger. Justice did eventually speak, though it had to take a long, winding road through nearly a decade of paperwork, disputes, and the unending grief of the Blackman family. The first trial took place after years of overlapping investigations, and in 2007, the Tokyo District Court delivered its verdict. Joji Obara was convicted for multiple rapes of foreign women and for causing the death of another victim, but the charge of murdering Lucie Blackman was not recognized due to a lack of direct evidence. That single sentence cut into the Blackman family like a blade. They listened to the verdict in silence, then shattered right where they sat. A gentle young woman who had left her home in search of new experiences was denied full justice, even after death. For many in the UK following the case, the ruling was not only a blow to the Blackman family, but also a shock to their perception of a justice system believed to be uncompromisingly strict. Japan is known for its near-perfect conviction rate. On paper, anyone who is indicted is almost guaranteed to be found guilty. And yet, in Lucie's case, despite stacks of videotapes, diaries, testimonies, and a body encased in concrete, the court declared there was insufficient direct evidence to prove murder. The contradiction made observers feel as though they were staring at a cracked mask. Behind the image of an efficient justice system lay a maze of procedural rigidity. where inflexibility sometimes overshadowed basic fairness. Former Japanese prosecutor Takeshi Tsuchimoto publicly criticized the ruling by referencing the Masumi Hayashi case, the woman sentenced to death for the Wakayama curry poisoning, largely on the basis of circumstantial evidence. He posed a sharp question. If the system could use indirect evidence to take away the life of a domestic defendant, why could it not use the same type of evidence to secure legal justice for a foreign victim like Lucie? The discrepancy in how the sufficiency of evidence standard was applied left many believing that behind the dry legal language were decisions that did not always fall on the side of victims. International media from common law countries, accustomed to juries and a more flexible interpretation of beyond reasonable doubt, highlighted another painful truth. Police had failed to investigate promptly because of their prejudice toward the hostess profession, causing Lucie's remains to be found far too late to determine the cause of death. In other words, the very indifference of the authorities at the start had created the forensic gaps that the court would later use to say there is not enough evidence. It was a cruel and circular reality. The system ignored the victim, then used the consequences of its own neglect to block her path to justice. Amid the controversy, another fracture appeared, this time not in the courtroom, but within the Blackman family itself. British newspapers suddenly revealed that Tim Blackman had accepted a condolence payment of about 100 million yen, roughly $450,000, from one of Joji Obara's university friends. In Japan, this practice is common and known as mimaikin, money offered by a defendant's family or associates as a gesture of apology, sometimes viewed by the court as a sign of remorse that could help reduce sentencing. But when placed in the context of a case that had shaken the international community, the phrase condolence money was instantly translated by the British press into something far heavier: blood money. Tim's ex-wife Sue publicly denounced him in the media, likening the payment to Judas's 30 pieces of silver, invoking the biblical image of betrayal. His other children were also reported to have opposed the decision. They feared that signing documents associated with mimaikin, some of which included statements acknowledging weak points in the prosecution's case, could be misinterpreted as supporting the defense's narrative, or, at the very least, appear as a silent handshake between the victim's family and those aligned with Obara. To many residents of Seven Oaks, a chilling ethical question echoed: how could anyone accept money from a friend of a rapist suspected of killing their daughter? Tim explained that he did not accept the money to forgive Obara, but for two reasons: partly to cover the crushing legal and funeral expenses the family had endured for years, and partly to establish an organization that would support British families whose loved ones went missing or were murdered overseas. From that decision, the Lucie Blackman Trust was born, later renamed LBT Global, with the mission of providing information, liaising with police and embassies, and ensuring families would not have to navigate foreign legal systems alone, as his own family once had. But the fate of Lucie's case did not end there. In December 2008, under the cold lights of the appeals courtroom, a flicker of hope returned. This time, the appellate court convicted Obara for kidnapping, dismembering, and disposing of Lucie's body, charges that laid bare his brutality. Although they still could not convict him of murder due to forensic evidence being too degraded by time, a life sentence without parole was imposed, sealing the final door to Obara's freedom. Japan's Supreme Court later dismissed all remaining appeals, upholding the sentence in full. The tragic story of Lucie Blackman closed with the silence of a young woman who had once carried such a radiant smile through an unfamiliar Tokyo. People remember Lucie not for the way she died, but for the brief, luminous life she lived before darkness swallowed it. She became a reminder that the world holds invisible corners where seemingly harmless invitations can lead to irreversible destinies. The lesson Lucie leaves behind, one of vigilance, intuition, and cherishing moments of peace, is the final gift she gives to all of us.